Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I was talking about immunity last time. The three major areas of immunity in your body are your long bones, your femur, your spleen, and your thymus. You also have other areas that hold white cells, tonsils, and adenoids. This is especially prevalent during when an individual is young. Once you graduate, once you mature, of course, you don't need your tonsils and adenoids anymore. But that is a specific area for the upper respiratory infections potentially that individuals suffer when they're children. The thymus is especially large through adolescence. As you wander into adulthood, the thymus actually doesn't really shrink. What happens is it is replaced with fat. All the cells are replaced with fat. So the thymus isn't as prevalent later on. Your spleen becomes your major area of repository. Your spleen becomes your major repository, along with the lymph nodes. We have a number of lymph nodes. Once you gain adulthood, of course, your immunity becomes stronger than it was when you were a child. Spleen is extremely important. It's a very strange organ. It has two jobs. One is as a repository for white cells, and the other job that the spleen has is it filters the blood. It doesn't filter the blood like the kidneys do. It filters the blood and takes out nuclear material. So if you don't have a spleen, one of the things that happens is that your red cells have small particles of nucleus in them. Red cells actually don't have a nucleus. And of course, if you have red cells with a nucleus, you've got a real serious problem because they can't carry oxygen. But one of the problems with individuals who don't have spleens is that they have tiny pieces of nuclear material in them. They still are functional, obviously they're still functional, but they have these tiny pieces in there called Howell-Jolly bodies. Not that that's important to anybody who has a spleen, because you don't have to worry about it. Those of us who don't have spleens, of course, now we've got a problem. The spleen normally contains about 40% of the natural killer cells, and 25% of the B cells, and 10% of the T cells. So the spleen is extremely important. It's a repository. So if there is some kind of a sudden infection wandering around your community, the spleen, of course, is there to fight off the infection. What if you don't have a spleen? What happens next? Well, theoretically, and this has happened to some people, they become immunocompromised if they don't have a spleen. In other cases, like my own, I don't really have a problem with infections for one reason or another, and I don't get sick, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The doctors, of course, want me to die. They keep telling me you should be dead. They can't figure out why I don't get sick, so it kind of pisses them off a little bit that their theories aren't actually fitting what's going on. 40% of the T cells and 40% of the B cells are located in the lymph nodes. And of course we need this because we need our immune system to be ready to fight off any infection that comes along. So if they're circulating throughout the lymph nodes, they're actually ready to fight infection. Another area, as we breathe, of course, outside right now we have all that smoke. But as we breathe and take in different toxins and different infectious materials, we need our lungs to have as many to be as strong as far as immunity is concerned as possible. And so our lungs contain about 35% of the NK cells and 10% of the T cells. And of course, that has to do with respiratory problems. And there are respiratory problems all over the place. If we touch any surface, of course, we're going to take in any of these rhinoviruses and whatnot. And I never catch a cold, which is very confusing. If there's a new infection around, I don't get it. As I told you before, I was in 2 influenza epidemics in Washington, D.C. Back in, when was this? 1999, 2000. And huge epidemics, but I didn't get sick. And like I said, I handled a lot of infected material. But I never got sick, despite the fact I don't have a spleen, which was a shock to everybody. During times of stress, the immune system is normally suppressed. While on the surface this may not make sense, one has to remember that the immune system requires a great deal of resources from the human body just to maintain your immune system. So if you're in a really serious situation where it's either a fight or flee or die situation, the immune system will be suppressed. And it will be suppressed for an extended length of time until the danger is gone, since the immune system uses so many resources. People under a great deal of stress over a long period of time are more susceptible to select infections. They will, potentially, one of the things that will happen is they'll feel tired all the time. I fell asleep at like 5 o'clock, like you falling asleep in my office. I'm so tired, but I have a lot of stuff that I have to do. And one of the things I was noticing is that I'm having a hard time maintaining my muscle mass. So I decided to start lifting again. So I lifted last Friday. I lifted the Friday before that. I feel much, much better because, well, I'm not worried about losing my muscle mass. Another one is hypertension. I do have hypertension. Ulcers, I don't have ulcers. Loss of libido, I don't have to worry about that. Suppression of ovulation or impotency, and accelerated aging. And of course, I do have to worry about that. I'm already 68. I certainly don't want to accelerate my aging any more than I already have. Psychology and medicine have melded at various times since the advent of psychology. Medical doctors are very much aware that some people may think that they're sick, but they actually aren't sick, and this is known as psychosomatic illnesses. They deal with these illnesses through psychosomatic medicine. One of the things we know is that if somebody thinks that a medicine is going to work, it will actually work, whether it should work or not. And this is known as a placebo effect. So the human body has an ability to do things. As long as the brain thinks it's going to happen, then the body actually allows it to happen. Of course, the placebo effect has to do with endorphins. And we know that. We know that that's true. So can you make yourself sick just by thinking that you're sick? And the answer is, of course, yes. Of course you can. If you think you're sick, then it'll create stress in your system, and the stress, of course, will make you actually sick. So if we can convince you that you're not sick, maybe you're less likely to be sick. This is known as health psychology, and I'm going to be teaching this class next semester. Actually, there are 2 of us that will be teaching it. Is that true? Yeah. There's 2 of us that will be teaching it. I'll be teaching it in the classroom, and my new colleague will be teaching it online. So if you need to take it online, or if you don't need to take it at all, don't take it. It's a fun class. I have a good time with that class. As I have told you before, I've dealt with, I was in medicine for 30 years, so I have a lot of backstories and whatnot. I've seen a lot of stuff. I've seen some amazing things, and I've seen some horrible things, but and that has to do with health psychology. Psychoneuroimmunology studies the immune system and its interaction with the nervous system and human behavior. So psychoneuroimmunology is also an area that I've studied, fascinating. topic. Of course, I dealt with this for an extended length of time as a laboratory technician. And that's the end of chapter 15, is that right? Okay, so we're on 16. All right, 16 is a fun chapter. It's all about mental illness. Everybody likes talking about mental illness, especially me. Whoops, it says Ashford University. I'm not at Ashford anymore. Let's get off that page. Let's get off that page. There we go, okay. According to a study by National Institute of Mental Health in 2005, 32.2% of the population of the United States will have a psychiatric disorder at some time in their life. That's about 1 out of every 3. There's only 2 of us in the room, so I guess we're okay. The next guy that comes in is going to be wacko. Within any given 6-month period, 19.1% of the population suffers from a psychiatric disorder. That's 1 out of every 5. So if 5 people come in, then they will have a mental illness within the next 6 months. 16.4% of the U.S. population will suffer from some form of substance abuse in their lives. Doesn't seem like enough. And actually, this may be much higher. What are we doing? We're doing something stupid. Oh, we're legalizing marijuana around the United States. So this may increase markedly. What else are we doing? We have an opioid problem in the United States, and we have people dying in the streets from opioid. There we go. There's the third person.
Oh no.
Okay, I know. Congratulations. 1 out of every 3 people will have a mental illness sometime in their lives. And we were the only 2 people in the room, so we're good. So what does that do to you? Maybe you've already done it. Okay.
You live with the diagnosis.
Yeah, okay. So, and this is a really serious problem, and depending on where you are, of course, you may think, well, the 16.4%, that's really low. Yeah, there is a lot of substance abuse on the reservation, but I've worked on reservations where it was worse. The figures on Fort Belknap were 80%. 80% substance abuse. Almost everybody I knew there were recovered or recovering alcoholics. I know, it's very strange. Why Northern Plains Indians, I have no idea. We saw the same thing at Fort Peck. We saw the same thing on the Blackfeet Reservation. We saw the same thing on the Crow Reservation. Why the Northern Plains people drink more than everybody else, I have no idea. It isn't against their culture, and it is against your culture. So that may be one of the differences. This population, the Navajo population, actually has one of the lowest alcoholism rates among all the groups of natives in the United States, of the indigenous people in the United States. So there you go. If you think it's bad here, it's worse everywhere else. That I can tell you that. Well, there's 4 of us now, so I don't know what this means. One more person, and one person is going to have a really serious problem. Oh yeah, that's within the last 6 months. 6% have suffered from some form of substance abuse within any 6-month period. And like I said, it may be actually be higher than that because of the opioid problem we have in the United States, and also the legalization of marijuana. We have no idea what this is going to do. We can't look at Colorado and assume every place is going to be the same. But it's a drug, and if we legalize a drug, just like alcohol, when alcohol was against the law, then we had a lot less alcoholism in the United States. So if we legalize marijuana, it's going to increase the number of people with problems. What does marijuana do? Why is it so bad? Alcohol makes you drunk. Marijuana doesn't make you drunk. Well, it kind of does. What is it going to do to the people in the United States? Any ideas? What does it do? It does a thing that we refer to as takes away your volition, which means you don't want to do anything. You just want to sit there and smoke pot. I have a friend that was in Vietnam, and he picked up the habit in Vietnam, and when he came back, that's pretty much all he did was look for pot. Well, and of course, marijuana was illegal at the time, so he was wandering around every day. He wandered around looking for more and more pot. And that's all he did for the next 50 years, 45 years. He's still alive, which is kind of amazing to me, because this guy should be dead like 3 times over. He's the guy that the reason he joined the army was because he had 3 women pregnant at the same time. Yeah, I know, what a stud. He's so studly. His ex-wife, his wife, and his girlfriend all had babies within a week of one another. That's old Eddie. He was something else. Anyway, so yeah, he's never been able to hold down a job. His family used to own like 200 or 300 acres of farmland, and it all disappeared for one reason or another. Then his mother went into the nursing home. His stepmother, his adopted mother, his biological mother. He was actually a twin, which is kind of scary in itself. She went into a nursing home, and he used to race to the post office on the 1st of the month to steal her Social Security check. That's a loving son, isn't it? I know, he's a wonderful fellow. Anyway, that's old Eddie for you. All that's left of their farm is the farmhouse, and that's where he lives. He lives in the basement, and he's got aluminum foil and black plastic bags all over the windows downstairs. He doesn't do anything with the upstairs except cook if he feels hungry, and I guess he gets the munchies. He's turned into a big glob of goo. It's just a round fellow. Anyway, that's old Eddie. I'm surprised he's still alive. Okay, so what's going on? 13.3% of the population will suffer from alcohol abuse or dependence in their lives. Of course, I'm reading papers right now, and several people have talked about alcohol abuse. And they talk about alcohol abuse on the reservation, which is really fascinating. I guess the best way to drink on the reservation is to live close enough to the edge of the reservation because it's against the law. This is a dry reservation. So they live close to the border, so they can wander into Gallup and get all the booze they want. Or on the other side, I guess. The other thing is bootlegging. I guess that's really popular. 4.7% have suffered alcohol abuse or dependence in the last 6 months. And that's a lot of people. 5.9% of the population will suffer from drug abuse or dependence in their lives. 2% have suffered from some form of drug abuse or dependence in the last 6 months. And we're not talking about alcohol here, we're talking about opioids or speed or crystal meth. Since 2005, of course, we've had a crystal meth problem, we've had an opioid problem, so potentially these figures are low. 1.5% of the population will suffer from schizophrenia sometime in their lives. If you multiply this out, it's about 3 million people, 3.6 million people, well more than that, about 5 million people, I guess, will suffer from schizophrenia sometime in their lives. About 0.9% have suffered from some form of schizophrenia within any 6-month period. And we're going to talk about schizophrenia. It's really kind of a fascinating disease. There has to be a trigger. And usually the trigger is an infection that gets into your brain. But it also could be drugs. If you use opioids, or if you use LSD, or if you use marijuana. These are all hallucinogens, and they change what's going on in your brain. Now, if you don't have this proclivity for schizophrenia, you can't kick you into something that you don't have a proclivity for. So just because you smoke pot doesn't mean you're going to be schizophrenic. But if you're going to be schizophrenic and you smoke pot, it's going to kick you into psychosis a lot faster. Same thing with opioids. Remember the guy that went into the Walmart up in just north of Denver and killed 3 people? That was about 2 or 3 weeks ago on the weekend. You don't remember this. This guy just started popping away with a pistol. And then he walked out of the store. Everybody's hiding and running away. And he just walked out of the store. Well, they caught him the next day. One of the things that they discovered was that this guy had used LSD at some point in his life, and it had tripped him into psychosis, so he was schizophrenic. So he's killed 3 people, but he will never go to trial because he is a known schizophrenic. And it's because of the LSD that he utilized once upon a time, and it kicked him into psychosis. 8.3% of the U.S. population will suffer from an affective disorder, either being manic or depressive, sometime in their lives. 5.8% have suffered from some form of affective disorder within the last 6 months. 0.8% of the U.S. population will suffer from a manic episode sometime in their lives. 0.5% have suffered some form of manic episode within any 6-month period. Of course, if you take speed or crystal meth, if you take any of the amphetamines, the accelerants, these things will make you seem like you are manic. 5.8% of the population will suffer from a major depressive episode in their lives. 3% will suffer some form of major depressive episode within any 6-month period. That's incorrect. It should be 33%, not 3.3%. 33% of the U.S. population will suffer from a form of minor depression in their lives. Of course, there's 4 of us in the room, so one of us will suffer from depression sometime in their lives. An undisclosed number will suffer from some form of minor depression. And this is known as dysthymia, or just sadness, I guess you could say. So if any of you have been sad over the last 6 months, then you're the one, and I don't have to worry about it. Despite all the work I have to do, there are like 15 papers I need to read. Not depressed, that's depressing. 14.6% of the U.S. population will suffer from an anxiety disorder in their lives. 8.9% have suffered some form of anxiety disorder within any 6-month period. Oh boy, so we're getting a lot of figures. It looks like we've got a lot of strange stuff going on. 12.5% of the U.S. population will suffer from a phobia sometime in their lives. This may be stage fright, maybe a phobia against rats or clowns or all kinds of interesting. Maybe heights, you don't like heights. These are phobias. If you have an unnatural fear of something, then that is known as a phobia. 7.7% have suffered some form of phobia within the last 6-month period. Usually it's stage fright. People just get scared. Panic attacks. Well, there you go, panic disorder, 1.6%. Not a whole lot of panic attacks in the United States, 1.6%, not that high. 8% have suffered some form of panic disorder within the last 6 months. 2.5% of the U.S. population will suffer from obsessive compulsive disorder in their lives. Aaron's character that he has created is obsessive compulsive. 1.5% have suffered some form of obsessive compulsive disorder within any 6-month period. What's it like acting like you're obsessive compulsive? I just wondered. Man, the Marines almost make you obsessive compulsive. I see that your hair is a high and tight, so.
It's not a high.
No, it's not even close.
It's not even close to that. It's
I know.
we never.
This is the way we wear hair in the Air Force. So. I know you guys think that there's something wrong with us. Obviously there's something wrong with you guys. So. Yeah. A study by Kessler and his colleagues in 1994 disclosed that almost half the population would suffer from a psychiatric disorder in their lifetime. This was in 1994. That was 20 years ago, over 20 years ago. 25 years ago. 30% of his respondents reported a psychiatric disorder within the previous 12 months to the survey. So we're talking about a lot of people having problems in the United States. Once upon a time, we didn't know what caused insanity, but we had a lot of people stuck in mental hospitals. In 1911, they discovered syphilis. Why? What in the world is syphilis? Well, syphilis is this thing. It's a spirochete. Most bacteria look like this. They look like little basketballs, or they look like little hot dogs. That's what they look like. So if you look at somebody's infection, if you have a strep infection or you have a staph infection, those are both cocci. They're both little balls like this. If you've got gonorrhea, it's a diplococci. It's one of these things. But syphilis looks like this. It's the only spirochete that causes a problem. And we didn't know this until we had all these people having sex, and then they were becoming infected. And we had no idea why they were going crazy. Then eventually, of course, we started developing better and better microscopes, and then we discovered that they were suffering from a spirochete, and that is syphilis. In 1911, 25% of the population of mental hospitals, 25% of the people in mental hospitals were suffering from syphilis. So all we needed to do was cure syphilis, and we got rid of 25% of the people that were in the insane asylums. How about that for excitement? So we developed penicillin. Actually, we developed a couple of antibiotics before that. But once we developed penicillin, we've eradicated all these crazy people. All we need to do is treat them. All we need to do is discover them. And it's fairly obvious. It causes sores. It causes sores in your genitalia. Most people don't like having sores on their genitalia. All they need to do is go see the doctor. It's very easy to test somebody for syphilis. As a matter of fact, those of us who have been in the military, we tested you for syphilis every year when you had your physical. One of the things we tested you for was syphilis. No offense. When I was in the service, my major job was detecting venereal diseases. Well, we call them venereal diseases. Now we call them sexually transmitted diseases or sexually transmitted infections. That was my job. And I ran millions of tests for syphilis. I ran tens of thousands of tests for gonorrhea, as strange as that may seem. Military personnel seem to have sex with odd people on a fairly regular basis. Just something wrong with military people. But at the turn of the century, all you needed to do was have sex with anybody, and you potentially you would pick up syphilis. And of course, it made people crazy. Winston Churchill's parents died of syphilis. There were lots of people that died of syphilis. So where did syphilis come from? Well, it probably came from the Americas. It's one of the things that came out of this area. Not only did we transport corn and potatoes and tomatoes, but also gonorrhea and syphilis, as odd as that sounds. So the Spanish used to call it the French disease. The French used to call it the Spanish disease. The English called it the Spanish disease, I think, because it came out of Spain. Of course it came out of Spain. They were the first ones to come over it. And they're the first ones to pick it up. So you'd think it would be all over the indigenous populations in the New World, but the reality is that it seems to have been in the Caribbean, and that was about it. So the other people weren't suffering from it. A study by Kessler and his colleagues, I went backwards, didn't I? Most psychologists consider schizophrenia the most serious of mental disorders. Schizophrenia is known in every culture around the world. 1 to 2% of any population will suffer from symptoms of schizophrenia. So it doesn't matter if you're in India or you're in New Guinea or Brazil. About 1 to 2% of the population will suffer from schizophrenia. While the description of the symptoms of schizophrenia has changed over the years, The symptoms themselves have remained basically the same. And you have two different types of symptoms. You have positive symptoms, something that is added to somebody's personality, and you have negative symptoms, something that is taken away from their personality. So the positive symptoms are hallucinations, delusions, and excited motor behavior. These are things that are added to this select individual. Things that are taken away, slow and impoverished thought and speech, slows you down, it takes something away from you. Emotional and social withdrawal, and I'm going to show you a film of an individual suffering from schizophrenia, and you will see the emotional and social withdrawal. Blunted facial expressions. So no matter what they're saying, whether it's a happy thing or a sad thing, they have the same facial expression. So it's a blunted facial expression. Something has been taken away. So you have negative and positive symptoms with syphilis. I'm sorry, with schizophrenia. Ah, man. Family studies, actually, when did I join the military? In 1871. We still had people with syphilis that had never been treated for syphilis. So they were coming down with mental illnesses. They were coming down with a disease or a condition. Actually, it's a condition. It's not really a disease. Syphilis is the disease. This is the condition that happens if you don't treat it, known as paresis, and that is all of those euphoria and whatnot. Really interesting to see these individuals because they were military people. And of course, they tried to hide the fact that they had syphilis, and which was the biggest mistake of their lives, because it gets into your brain, and eventually it turns your brain into pablum. But it also fuses the vertebra in your neck. So these individuals are always standing at attention, they're sitting at attention and standing at attention. It's really kind of interesting. Anyways, notice paresis. So I actually was able to see some of this with some of the old soldiers from World War I and World War II. That was in 71. So we still had soldiers from World War I that were alive. If schizophrenia is genetic, then relatives of schizophrenics should have a higher incidence of schizophrenia than the public at large, and this is exactly what we found. General population, about 1 to 2% incidence rate in the general population. The parents of somebody with schizophrenia, the rate is 6%, siblings 9%, and even half-siblings 6%. So as you can see, there is a genetic component to it, but we're not exactly sure how strong it is. The closer the relation, the greater the risk, of course. When we start talking about monozygotic twins, identical twins, we're going to find rates of 48%, which is really, really high. I want to show you what somebody with schizophrenia looks like and sounds like. They're really fascinating people. Let me make this thing work. There we go. We don't have any noise, do we?
Leave the hospital tomorrow?
I would like to leave the hospital tomorrow because I got things I got to do.
Okay. There's going to be a hearing tomorrow to see whether or not there's any legal basis why you have to stay here.
I'm not crazy.
If it was up to you, would you like to leave the hospital tomorrow?
I would like to leave the hospital tomorrow because I got things I got to do.
Okay, well, I'm
This is the first
going to
month,
be...
there's a lot of rent to be paid and all that.
Okay, what brought you into the hospital?
I turned myself in at 5150 because I felt like killing myself.
Okay, so you came here voluntarily.
But I could stop killing myself.
And what was going on that you felt like killing
It was
yourself?
3 o'clock in the morning, I couldn't sleep, all of the same thoughts kept racing through my mind over and over and over again. I just wanted them to stop, period. And I thought, well, if I kill myself, I'll stop thinking. And I thought, well, that isn't too good of an idea either, because you've got friends and people around you that love you. So I stopped that thought. And I said, well, who am I going to call? I call up Ghostbusters. I mean, no, that came out wrong. It's a joke. And I didn't call Ghostbusters. I called a crisis intervention center. And I talked to them on the phone. And they said there was nothing they could do for me for one night. So I wanted to hear my ambulance. Getting an ambulance to take me.
Okay.
Because the crisis intervention couldn't do anything for me.
Have you ever made any suicide attempts?
Oh yeah, I have. A couple of them when I was 19.
Okay. Are you usually able to ask for help when you start feeling like that?
No, I was never able to ask for help before.
Okay, so this is a new thing,
This is a
you're
new
coming
thing
into
for
the
me.
hospital.
And when I
Okay.
came in here to stop, it's unlike any other way I've ever come into a hospital. I asked people to please help me, so I do not kill myself.
That's all the questions I have for you right
Can
now.
I go back in now? I'm getting very uncomfortable out here. I think somebody might be trying to shoot me.
Do you see the way he moved? It's really slow, really deliberate.
TV tooth on my surprise, and they put little needles in your scalp. And they listen to you for years, if you know it or not. I didn't know it. And they have this really fantastic, expensive equipment. They touched me with this. They said to me, hey, we can check your head, you know, for if your body shows up bruised and the electricity is a little different across the scalp of your scalp, but we guarantee Social Security from that injury on its own. It's considered like cerebral palsy, but it would be muscular dystrophy kind of thing. And so I said, think about it. The next day, think about it. And give it right, you know. And all that stuff. Okay, I'll look at it. Okay, let's go. And when they put the needle in, the last one they put in, they put like this. So when they did it, I had a thought of when they pulled them out, they pulled them out perfect, but they left a little teeny little barb in every one of the places they put me. And they recorded it. And one person who wanted it didn't. Someone else sold it to someone else, I don't know who, but they're able to give a response back because of how thick the dental is in my teeth. How thick the dental is. And with the needles, they're easy to focus a heavier field of pickup reception because of all the fillings I got. And so I think it's people like at Stanford and technicians, wealthy technicians, and people that do stuff like NASA or any of that kind of stuff. Ames Institute. And I came right up to them and tried to sell them the last of them. But for the amount of money they didn't have, I should have just gave it to them.
I get to the point where I don't want to live anymore because the mental process of mine takes over. When I think I'm doing good for a while, something mental takes over and it scares me. Years ago, I didn't do that. Years ago, I didn't have to worry about that one thing. I was one less paranoid. I was one less crazy. I was one less crazy. I mean, years ago, I didn't have this new mental problem. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is, and it's pretty scary. That's why I called the police. Nobody else was doing it. But those people at 7-Eleven, they're always on the phone talking about me. Always. Especially in the summertime, nice weather. They're always talking about me, calling hospitals, Barnes, St. John's. There's a lot of doctors at, not 7-Eleven, Quick Trip, you know what Quick Trip is? There's always a lot of doctors and nurses going there making more like kill her or do something to her.
Do you notice changes in your attention, with your illness?
Huh?
Do you notice changes in attention with your illness?
I'm retarded.
Do you notice having problems focusing attention or keeping your attention on things?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
I don't know. What was it again?
When was the last time you felt good?
I don't remember. It's killing me. It's keeping me from having a boyfriend, keeping me from drugs. It's killing me. like in China or somewhere. I just knew that somebody's been suffering years ago, they should take an OD and die, because psychologically they may not want to take the OD, but to get out of their misery, they might. They fight it every night. And every day he's always fighting with me. Michael's always fighting with me. Drug dead, geek, retarded kids. That stuff doesn't mean shit to me anymore. I'm so used to it. I do have a brain problem. But I don't have a brain tumor.
How are you doing? I feel as though people have called me here to electrocute me, judge me, put me in jail, or kill me, electrocute me because of some of the sins I've been in.
Is this a new healing for you?
The main thing is don't get excited with the thing is it's not a new feeling, no. I'm scared of people.
It's very frightening for you, though. You look like you're right at close.
It's so scared I can tell you that picture's got a headache.
Can you tell me more about that? The picture has a headache?
You want to know?
Yes, I do.
Okay, when a sperm and an egg go together to make a baby, only one sperm goes up in the egg. And when they touch, there's two contact points that touch before any other two. And then it's carried up into the air. And when they fuse, it's like nuclear fusion, except it's human fusion. There's mass loss of the proton. One heat abstraction goes up in the electron, spins around, comes back down into the proton to form the mind. The mind can be reduced to one atom.
At this point, what would you like us to do for you?
I'd like you to get me off the steroids. Get me dried out, cleaned up, so I can go home and get a job in the bakery, go to medical school.
Wants to go to medical school. Okay. No. Yeah, that's what schizophrenia looks like. Lots of theories as to what's going on. One of schizophrenia just may be a condition. It is caused from a lot of different sources. So we're going to talk about some of those sources right now. Lots of research out there trying to figure out, actually psychology is a science that started trying to figure out how to get all these people better. What can we possibly do with these select individuals? That was the problem. We needed to empty, or we were trying to stop people from going in to mental hospitals and cure the ones that were in there. And that's one of the reasons why psychology became a science. If we look at almost all the medications that we have, all the psychotropics, most of the medications were developed trying to cure schizophrenia rather than depression or any other problem. Because people weren't being institutionalized because of depression or anxiety. It was usually schizophrenia, and that's what we were trying to take care of. So there's a lot of theories out there as to what's going on. This is, actually that is a picture of E. Fuller Torrey. He showed, working with twins, he discovered that it was, we could see that there was one twin, if they were discordant, if one twin had schizophrenia and the other one didn't. We could see this from the very beginning, from infancy, as strange as that seems. So there's obviously something going on with these select individuals. They looked at discordant monozygotic twins and showed that the twin that developed the schizophrenia was the lowest birth weight of the two, and that they had the most abnormalities throughout their lives. And you could pick it out, and it gets even more interesting. Elaine Walker looked at these same monozygotic twins. She proved that even the least indoctrinated layperson could pick out the future schizophrenic twin from home movies. This they were able to do with uncanny accuracy. So anybody in this room can pick out somebody with schizophrenia. If you see them, you know that there's something wrong. There's obviously something wrong. I have a niece that has schizophrenia, and you can see it from her baby pictures. She never smiled as a baby. She always had this strange look on her face. She never smiled, and she only smiled when she was around select people. And one of those select people was not her mother, which just upset her mother to no end. But if you look at pictures of her, if everybody's standing in a group, the entire family is standing in a group. She's the one without the smile. She also looked very, very much different from everybody else in the family because she was a redhead. Nobody else in the family had red hair. Everybody else had brown hair and blonde hair, but she had red hair. So she looked different and she acted different. I'm not saying that just because you have red hair makes you schizophrenic, but in her case, the difference of having red hair seems to have had an impact on her. If she hadn't had schizophrenia, the red hair, of course, wouldn't have made any difference. Work by Levy et al. In 1993 and Stube et al. In 1997 demonstrated that individuals suffering from schizophrenia are unable to follow a slow to and fro movement, such as the pendulum of a clock, even if it moves very, very slowly. Schizophrenics tend to have their eye movements interrupted with jerky eye movements called saccades. And that's what it looks like. And of course, really kind of fascinating. So you can diagnose somebody with schizophrenia just if they can't follow the movement of something swinging back and forth between their in front of their eyes. This is the way that the tracking takes place for somebody with schizophrenia. Because there's breaks, they're trying to follow it, and their eyes are here, and so they have to move their eyes over here. So they have all these breaks, and of course anybody, all of us in this room, if I swung a watch in front of your face, you'd be able to follow it. Work by, how, is that important? Yeah, that's really important because this has to do with diagnosing somebody either with schizophrenia or with neurological damage. And that's one of the things that we will do with an individual that has had a brain trauma. One of the things that we know from the CTI that we're seeing, CTE, we're seeing with football players is that they lose the ability to follow, to track things from side to side. As strange as that may seem. So either they have schizophrenia or they have CTE. Work by Kedin and her colleagues in 1975 and again in 1994 looked at the psychiatric histories of adoptees and their biological and adoptive parents. They discovered that adoptees who suffered from schizophrenia, the biological parents were far more likely to suffer from schizophrenia than the adoptive parents. It was really kind of an interesting study because what they were trying to prove was that there is a conditioning process. So you can treat somebody like as if they're schizophrenic, and you can condition them to act like they're schizophrenic. That was the idea. And of course, one of the things that they discovered was that despite the fact, so you can cure these individuals by taking them away from that type of treatment or learning process. So all we need to do is remove them from the home. I know that sounds horrible or that sounds strange, but we had done this before in the past. If you've got a pathological family, sometimes one of the things that will happen is the only way for you to cope is to act like everybody else in the family. So it's a conditioning process, it's a learning process. So people learn to act crazy, and that's the only way they can survive in a select environment. Take them out of that environment and they're perfectly normal. After you recondition them, you have to recondition them, of course. But you can't do that with schizophrenics. As you saw the 4 individuals that were in the film, there's just no way to recondition these individuals. They have disorganized thoughts. And I'll show you exactly why their thoughts are disorganized in just a second. Combining the twin families and adoptee studies, many researchers have concluded that there is a genetic factor in schizophrenia that is inheritable. What structure is being inherited? You know, these are all the questions that we keep asking ourselves. What structure is being inherited? What structures are involved? Which genes are being inherited? And what processes do they control? While autopsies are often found in large ventricles on people suffering from schizophrenia, it wasn't until the brain imaging techniques, the CAT scans and the MRIs, that this was confirmed in living patients at all stages of the disease. I can remember when they first started doing this, Muhammad Ali had just started suffering from Parkinson's disease. So they did a brain scan of his brain, and what they found out was that it was hollowing out from the inside out. The ventricles were getting larger and larger and larger as far as he was concerned. And then they looked at other boxers, and that's exactly what they found. They found that the ventricles were enlarging. Did they have schizophrenia? No, they didn't have schizophrenia. They had brain damage, and the brain damage was causing the ventricles to get larger. But with somebody with schizophrenia, this is what we see. The larger the ventricles, the larger the open areas in the brain, the more severe their symptoms. So we can actually do brain scans on an individual that we think has schizophrenia, and we can discover whether they actually have it or not. But of course, there was a question. There's always a question. What is causing the problem? Why are the ventricles enlarging? Is it the schizophrenia that's causing the problem, or is the enlarging ventricles causing the schizophrenia? That was the question that we had to answer. People with schizophrenia don't eat very well. So is it the dietary limitations? We can't give them anything that will stimulate them, because if we stimulate them, then their behavior becomes erratic. So we have to control their diet. We can't give them caffeine, for example. We can't give them sugars. We have to control their sugar intake in order to control their symptoms. Of course, they've been under stress for an extended length of time because of the schizophrenia. And also, the drugs that we give them are fairly toxic. They're extremely toxic. What am I talking about? These things are poisons. So maybe it's the antipsychotic drugs that are causing the expansion of the ventricles in the brain. We don't know. So we needed to figure this out. The more advanced the case, the greater the enlarged areas of the ventricles. The larger the ventricles, the poorer response to antipsychotic drugs. Research has also shown that the lateral ventricles tend to be the most likely to be affected. And the lateral ventricles are the ones right in the middle of your brain. And that's what it looks like. As you can see, these are twins. They're identical twins. And as you can see, the ventricles in the normal twin are barely there at all. But in the schizophrenic twin, the ventricles are quite enlarged, as you can plainly see. And this is a discordant monozygotic twins. 28 years old. So when do people first develop symptoms of schizophrenia? When do we first start noticing it? Well, as I said, you can see it from infancy, but the reality is that, of course, we don't diagnose babies with schizophrenia. We don't do that. As a matter of fact, we don't diagnose toddlers with schizophrenia. We don't diagnose elementary school children with schizophrenia. We don't start diagnosing people with schizophrenia until adolescence, until they go through puberty. After puberty, now we can start diagnosing them. But we will see that these individuals have acted erratically almost all their lives, or at least differently. And there is a reason for that, and I'll show you what it is in just a second. Discordant twin studies, where one, of course, has schizophrenia, the other one doesn't, show that 75% of the cases, in 75% of the cases, the hippocampus and the amygdala were smaller in the schizophrenic twin. Researchers speculate that the enlarged ventricles and smaller brain structures denotes atrophy of neural tissue. So there is a lot of disorganized thought taking place, and because of that, they're not taking in new information. They can't, because their brains are too active, thinking about what they're thinking about now. So because of that, the neural tissue is atrophying. Looking deeper into the hippocampus, researchers have discovered that pyramidal cells of people suffering from schizophrenia are disorganized in the sufferer as compared to the normal individual. So the pyramidal cells don't look the same. How do we remember things? How do we think? We think in a linear fashion. So the thought is created in some place, and then it follows a normal pattern or a path to recover the memories of that thought process. The degree of disorganization relates directly to the severity of the disorder. And this is what it looks like. In a normal individual, their pyramidal cells are in a linear fashion, as we can see. Now, as we were listening to those people talking, a lot of times they didn't make any sense. One thought didn't really follow another. Now, normally, of course, our thoughts do. We have a direct pattern of thought. And it's because our pyramidal cells are arranged in a linear fashion. This is what it looks like for somebody with schizophrenia. Their thoughts are all over the place. So one thought pattern, one thought process will not follow an organized path, as it would in all of us in this room. Our thought patterns are very linear. Our thought patterns are very structured. Theirs are all over the map. And that's one of the reasons why the guy started talking about, the one guy had TV tooth. And he thought aliens were stealing his thoughts. And that's one of the reasons why he had the stocking cap on. And remember, he was talking about, things were coming in like this. So they were giving him information, and they were trying to steal his thoughts. And then he talked about, and he thinks it was Stanford University that was stealing his thoughts. I don't know if you picked that part up. So he talked to these really smart people once upon a time, and he asked them why they were stealing his thoughts. And he gave a really strange answer as to what was going on. So this is what's going on as far as the schizophrenic is concerned. They have disorganized thoughts, but then again, their pyramidal cells are not arranged properly. McCann and her colleagues speculate that this derangement of the hippocampal pyramidal cells occurs due to maternal exposure to the influenza virus during the second trimester of pregnancy. One of the things we're going to discover is there's a lot of different triggers. And one of the triggers may be the flu, as odd as that seems. So while the brain is developing, if the mother catches the flu while the baby is developing, then potentially the baby will have disorganized pyramidal cells in their hippocampus. So what is the most serious time to catch the flu when you're pregnant? And that is during the second trimester, which means that there are more schizophrenics out there who were born in the spring, because the flu season starts in usually October, November, December. That's usually the flu season. So they were, the mother gave birth sometime in March, April, or May. How many of you have a birthday in March, April, or May? You do? So as long as your mother didn't catch the flu, you're okay. Those of us born in the fall, we have no problem with this at all, because what are you going to catch in the summertime? A summer cold? I guess. Well, anyway, so the flu has something to do with schizophrenia, but it's not everybody who. Certainly, it's not everybody. Obviously, you don't suffer from schizophrenia. I haven't had very many conversations with you, but I don't think that you're schizophrenic. Like I said, I have a niece that's schizophrenic. She was born in December, so it obviously didn't have anything to do with this. Looking at blood flow in the brain during the resting state, researchers have discovered that in the brain of schizophrenia sufferers, the left hemisphere is more active than the right hemisphere in the frontal lobe. PET scans indicate that people suffering from schizophrenia have less metabolic activity in the frontal lobe. And I will show you a PET scan of that very thing. This is a normal individual. As you can see, the redder the area, the more thought processes are taking place. And as you can see, lots of red in the frontal lobe. And as you can see, this is an individual suffering from schizophrenia. Theoretically, this should be exactly the same as that, but because of they're trying to do the same task, but as you can see, there's less thought processes taking place in the frontal lobe with the individual suffering from schizophrenia, as odd as that seems. And we can see from the one on top, it's the same situation. This is the unaffected twin. As you can see, there's a lot more red areas. And this is a schizophrenic twin, and as you can see, there's not nearly as much thought processes taking place with the schizophrenic twin. And that has to do with disorganized thoughts. Because they have disorganized thoughts, they can't follow a thought pattern. An individual, everybody in this room obviously, can follow a thought pattern, and we will follow it throughout until we come up with a conclusion. Much of the proof that dopamine is the neurotransmitter that is one of the causes of the symptoms of schizophrenia comes from pharmacological studies. One of the things that they've done is they've tried all of these different drugs to cure schizophrenia. The drugs that seem to work the best are the ones that block dopamine receptor sites. Not just dopamine receptor sites, but dopamine 2. Remember, there's 5 dopamine receptor sites, and we call them D1, D2, D3, D4, D5. It's the D2 sites. If we can block the D2 sites, then one of the things that we have that we can do is take away the symptoms. So why dopamine? What is dopamine doing in your brain? For one thing, it's making you happy. And that's one of the things that it does. Another thing that dopamine does is that it collects information from the environment. So when you hear something, dopamine is affected. When you see something, when you smell something, when you taste something, the water. How does water taste? Okay. It's not supposed to taste like anything. Anyway, okay, so we're gaining all this information all the time. So our D2 receptor sites are taking in all of this stimuli from the environment. And that's the purpose of the D2 receptor sites. So as you're sitting in your chair and feeling your butt on the hard chair, I guess those aren't too hard. That's not too bad. But you're feeling that, you guys have your hands up to your face, so you're feeling your face. You probably feel your beard a little bit. You don't have a beard, so you aren't feeling the same thing. But where you're feeling things, you're smelling things, you're hearing things, you're tasting things. All of this is taking place at the same time. And all this is coming into D2 receptor sites. Well, they seem to have more D2 receptor sites. Schizophrenics have more D2 receptor sites. So they're getting information that isn't actually there. And that's one of the reasons why he's talking about all these alien things and things are going on in his brain. Well, he's got all these D2 receptor sites that are not really receiving information, but they're telling him that something is going on. And that is part of his disorganized thought processes. His D2 receptor sites are too active. These individuals tend to be extremely sensitive to things. Their clothes are too scratchy. The food tastes too strong. Tastes like there's poison. It's very common for somebody with schizophrenia to think that they're being poisoned because they can taste it in their food. They're very sensitive to these things. Smells, they're very sensitive to odors. One of the reasons why if you've ever been around a group of people suffering from schizophrenia, they're not close to each other. It's because they don't want to smell each other, because they're too sensitive to these things. So what we have to do, and one of the ways that we discovered the dopamine receptor sites was because we discovered chlorpromazine. And once we started giving them chlorpromazine, it blocks the D2 receptor sites. And these individuals started acting normal. They could be around people without being offended by the smell. They stopped thinking that people were trying to poison them. But unfortunately, chlorpromazine and most of the thorazines that they were giving them actually gives them a bad taste in their mouth. So they think they're being poisoned all the time. They're really kind of odd, unfortunately. Due to the pharmacological evidence, it seems that the effectiveness of the antipsychotic agents is directly related to the magnitude of postsynaptic receptor blockade of dopamine sites. In other words, if we can block these sites, then they start acting normally, as I said before. Parkinson's disease is caused by the degeneration of the nerve cells in the substantia nigra, which contain dopamine. So Parkinson's disease is caused by a decrease of the dopamine in your brain. Schizophrenia seems to be caused by an overabundance of dopamine in your brain. So schizophrenia is what happens to you if you have too much, and Parkinson's is what happens to you if you have too little. When a patient is given too much L-DOPA is a synthetic dopamine, and they use that to compensate for the loss of dopamine. They develop schizophrenic type symptoms. So if somebody has Parkinson's disease and we give them L-DOPA and we give them too much, one of the things that will happen is they'll start acting schizophrenic. Some schizophrenic patients will develop Parkinsonian type symptoms if over-medicated with phenothiazines. And one of them is Thorazine. If you've ever seen anybody on Thorazine, a lot of times they walk like this. It's referred to as the Thorazine shuffle. What is it? It's Parkinsonian symptoms. They also have tremors. And they'll develop tardive dyskinesia, where they have tics in their faces. And that is from the Parkinsonian symptoms from the too much dopamine in their system. Now the question is, how much do you give somebody? And you want to give them exactly the right amount so they don't have Parkinsonian symptoms and they don't have schizophrenia. The problem is, of course, as they are synthesizing things throughout the day, the amount of medication that they need changes. If they're excited, it accelerates the process. So all of a sudden, they start having schizophrenic symptoms, or they burn up too much dopamine. Anyway, they will start having one of the symptoms or the other. So throughout the day, if you watch these people throughout the day, as things are happening to them, as they are, after they eat food, of course, they will have, or if they relax, then they start having Parkinsonian symptoms. It's really kind of bizarre. So it changes throughout the day as the synthesis, as their body chemistry changes, how they're synthesizing these medications. It's really kind of bizarre. So the question is, how much do you give them? And the answer is, you give them enough to control their behavior. That's pretty much it. However, some schizophrenia sufferers treated with dopamine inhibitors do not respond to them. So obviously their problem isn't dopamine, because they don't respond to the psychotropics, the antipsychotics that we can give them. Recently, they have developed a new generation of antipsychotics that have been developed that do not affect just dopamine levels, and they do work. And these are known as the atypical drugs. So we have typical schizophrenic antipsychotics, such as chlorpromazine and Thorazine, and we have the atypicals. Clozapine is one of these drugs. Now there's a problem with this drug. Wait a minute, what am I talking about? We give this to too many people. We don't just give it to people with schizophrenia. We also give it to people with depression, because it works on serotonin. Where was I? I was up in Montana. I was working on the reservation, and I had a lady, one of my students, was suffering from depression. And so, guess what they gave her? Prozac? Zoloft? Paxil? No, they gave her clozapine. It works on depression, but it's also an antipsychotic. Here they were giving her clozapine. Why? Well, they'd run out of all the other drugs, so they gave her clozapine instead. I know. I was shocked. And then guess what happened? So she went back I talked to her, and she went back to the doctor. He said, well, I think you not only are depressed, but you're also schizophrenic. You're paranoid, and that's the reason they gave her clozapine. They weren't telling her what was going on. So I caused all this trouble in the hospital at IHS. It's not my fault. It was his medication. She could have looked it up on the internet. Yeah, I'm a troublemaker. Sorry. They were treating him with clozapine. That's toxic. Clozapine is an atypical antipsychotic drug that not only blocks dopamine, of course, but it blocks serotonin as well. Clozapine actually seems to increase dopamine reception in the frontal lobe and making them happier. And of course, dopamine has to do with the pleasure loop in your brain. So the less dopamine you have, the less happy you are. If you can remember the first guy who told a joke, did you see him smile after he told the joke? She couldn't tell that he was kidding because he didn't smile. He had a flat effect, so he didn't smile. If I tell a joke, I laugh. Everybody does. I mean, you think it's funny. That's the reason you tell a joke. But if you're schizophrenic and you tell a joke, you don't laugh. And it looks weird. There was a comedian once upon a time. His name was Richard Wright. I think he's still alive. And that was his delivery. And people, they just laughed like crazy because this guy never reacted to his own jokes. He never even smiled. So he acted like he had Asperger's, which he may have, I don't know. Anyway, that was his shtick, was the fact that he had a flat effect. And people just thought it was hilarious. His jokes weren't that funny. But because he didn't react to them, people laughed like crazy. One theory about the development of schizophrenia is that the select chemicals build up or are created in the brain that cause the psychosis. These substances are referred to as psychotogens, literally brain monsters that develop or that build up in your brain. One theory is that an addition of a methyl group in the brain chemistry can cause the conversion of normal compounds to known hallucinogenic agents. This is known as transmethylation hypothesis or methyl crossing process, the transmethylation process. So it's a buildup of this methyl group in your brain, and it causes a toxic effect. Lots of different reasons. Remember, there's lots of different reasons for schizophrenia, and we've seen a couple of them. The psychobiological model of schizophrenia emphasizes that there may be several factors interacting that cause schizophrenia. Even if you read the positive sides about marijuana, one of the things they're going to tell you is that people are more likely to suffer from schizophrenia after they smoke marijuana. And that is true. And we think that's true because, remember, there has to be a trigger. We know that influenza during the second trimester of pregnancy can be a trigger. But we also know that these drugs, LSD, can be a trigger. The crystal meth, cocaine, amphetamines. This blocks the reuptake of a select neurotransmitter in your brain that makes you act schizophrenic, makes you act psychotic. So if you've ever been around somebody who was on crystal meth or who was on amphetamines or who had snorted cocaine, a lot of times they act crazy. Well, that's because their brains are actually in a psychotic situation as they are trying to function. Each life phase of brain development provides potential triggers to the development of schizophrenia. People genetically predisposed with brain abnormalities may or may not experience the proper triggers in the correct sequence to create the conditions for schizophrenia. One of the things that we know is that there is a gene that has to do with schizophrenia. And on that same gene is autism. And on that same gene is bipolar disorder. And also ADHD. So we know that there is a potential for one of these things to happen. So do ADHD people turn into schizophrenics? It's not usually the way it works. What happens is it manifests itself in one way or another. So you don't trip from autism to schizophrenia. You don't trip, or actually it would be the other way around. You don't skip from schizophrenia to autism. You don't skip from ADHD to autism. It doesn't work that way. You either develop one or the other. That's normally the way it works. I know it's as sad as that is. So it's all on the same gene. So we were trying to figure out the continuum, and I was working with a pathologist that was actually doing this work. And that was up at Fort Wayne. It's really kind of fascinating. And he's the first one that suggested that these were all the same diseases. They were just different intensities of those diseases. And as far as he was concerned, autism was the most severe of these diseases. It was, ADHD was the least. You had bipolar disorder, then schizophrenia, and then autism. Major depression is on that same gene. As confusing as that is. Or not confusing. Viral illnesses such as influenza and inoculations may be part of the trigger. The stress of urban life as compared to rural life shows that more people per capita have schizophrenia in urban settings compared to rural settings. And if you've ever been around urban people, they're always in a hurry. They seem to be on speed all the time. They act psychotic. And of course, so you guys are lucky that you live in this rural area because you're more normal than people that live in those crazy high-rises in Chicago and Los Angeles. And it's time to go. So thank you very much. It's been a fun. I like talking about this stuff. I know. Sorry that I gave you schizophrenia.